אנו מכריזים בזאת
Hello, this is Barry Shaw, and this is The View from Israel. Now, one of the many black spots that many of outside the United States have witnessed during the last year has been several things. There's the lawlessness on the streets of America, where defund the police is more than a slogan. We witness homicide rates exploding in mainly Democrat cities, where violent criminals are released back onto the streets to commit even more deadly crimes by lenient attorney generals and prosecutors who do more to defend the criminals than to prosecute them. The results have been a number, as I said, rise in homicides, carjacking, looting stores with impunity. Parents also in America seem to be alarmed at discovering that their children are being brainwashed by racist indoctrination. They've been warned that they may be branded as domestic terrorists if they vehemently kick back at school board meetings against the miseducation. The Biden's open border policy, literally millions of unverified, unvaccinated illegal migrants have been flooding into America, and most have been transported, often surreptitiously in the middle of the night, into mainly swing states or Republican states without the prior approvals of state governors or state attorney generals. Obviously, there's also great concern by those of us outside the United States about a Biden foreign policy, which seems to be molding not only America's enemies, because America's enemies are also Israel's enemies. This is a partial view of America with less than a year to go before the midterm elections in November 2022. And this brings me to the subject of today's show. My attention was attracted to the news that an Israeli-born woman is running for office. Sigal Chattah is hoping to become the next Attorney General in the state of Nevada. Sigal, welcome to The View from Israel.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for having me on the show. And good morning from Las Vegas.
Okay, been there once, enjoyed my stay. Nevada's a beautiful state, but I guess there are sort of problems that hopefully you could solve for Nevadans. To make your life more difficult, I understand you're running as a Republican in a Democratic state. Tell me, before we start, tell me about your background. I introduced you as Israeli-born, so how does an Israeli end up in Nevada and now running for office?
So, Barry, my father is a developer, and he moved here in 1988 and then brought us to Las Vegas in 1989 when Las Vegas was really dealing with an amazing economic boom. And so that's how we ended up here. We left Netanya, a nice little area called Ramat Poleg outside of Netanya. And we came to Las Vegas, and Las Vegas has been home since 1989.
Okay, you've been practicing law in private practice, a successful career, I understand. Now, what is it that made you decide to run for public office?
Well, essentially, what I saw during the COVID pandemic was that there was a serious lockdown on the citizens of the state of Nevada, whether it was closures, whether it was the governor determining that some businesses were essential versus non-essential, places of worship were shut down, and really all the things that were part of the American dream were something that was taken away in essence for the purposes of public health and fighting a pandemic that we are now 2 years into.
One of the things I heard about you that since you entered public service was you gained a reputation as the Jew that saved Christmas. I think that's quite typical because we're doing the show, recording the show between Christmas and New Year. So how did you get that title?
So yeah, that's a moniker that has apparently kind of made its way as my description and my moniker. I gained that title because I was the lawyer that actually sued the governor to reopen the places of worship. Barry, as you know, in the United States, part of the First Amendment is the free exercise of religious worship. And when he shut down the state, part of what he shut down was places of worship, which was a constitutional violation. And I sued him for doing that. And we got our decision 10 days before Christmas. So the public, with a few reporters, labeled me as the Jew who saved Christmas because everybody was able to attend church on Christmas.
So what prompted you to run for the position of Attorney General, and what is it you want to change in your state?
Again, my state, like many states, we are dealing with high crime rates. There's this cataclysmic explosion of crime under this administration. I think part of what we're seeing is because, the attorney general, instead of being the top prosecutor, he's one of these progressive attorney generals that we're seeing. He runs the attorney general's office like the public defender's office. We've seen some misdemeanors decriminalized. We've seen cash bail reform. We've seen all these issues that affect public safety, and the people of the state of Nevada are really sick of it. They're sick of high crime. They're sick of this explosion of capital crime, murders, stabbings. You can't turn on the news here without seeing somebody being stabbed or somebody being shot, and it's across the board. So it's not hitting certain demographics. It's really hitting all demographics, all socioeconomic statuses in fantastic areas of the town. These aren't crimes that are relegated solely to what you would call underprivileged communities. This is happening in really privileged communities in our state as well.
In preparation for this show to interview you, Sigal, I looked at some of the references or comments that you've been making, and you mentioned something to do with Carson City schools closed. At what point will the Nevada Attorney General start exercising concurrent jurisdiction and prosecuting elements that make our schools dangerous? What did you mean by that?
There was a situation in the United States where schools were closed because of these threats that teens were making on TikTok. And because of that, they shut down Washoe County schools because there was some sort of threat made. And it was really a result of this trend on TikTok of teenagers, whether they're doing bomb threats or school shooting threats. But the reality of it, it goes back to what I said earlier. We have an attorney general that instead of prosecuting crimes, in Nevada, we have the attorney general's office has concurrent jurisdiction, meaning he could prosecute in any county, in any municipality. So if the attorney general's office actually investigated and exercised those investigative rights, those investigative capabilities, what we would see is we would see that he is in fact a huge failure in prosecutions and investigating and keeping Nevadans safe. There's no reason why schools need to be shut down because of teenagers on TikTok.
That's to do with the schools, but since you're talking about crime and violent crime, you can ask, do you have a problem in Nevada like you have in other democratic states of a rise in homicide rates? And where do you stand on softer crime policies in Nevada? And how do you address bail reform? Is that a problem that has been in a number of other Democrat states where it seems that attorney generals or justices or district attorneys allow for no money bail, and where criminals can go back on the streets committing even more dangerous crimes?
Yes, we've seen that also in Nevada. There was a huge push for bail reform in Nevada. We've seen it. We've seen prior offenders get out on either low bail or we call it OR, on their own recognizance. And it is a problem. and the recidivism rate and the reoffender rate is high in those instances. Another issue is the decriminalization of misdemeanor offenses to citations. Um, and the view that I have on that is, when there's a misdemeanor offense that doesn't get prosecuted or gets prosecuted and then dropped, and there's no jail time, the criminal will be emboldened by that behavior. And so I am a huge advocate against bail reform, and decriminalization of misdemeanor offenses. I think that those misdemeanor offenses are gateway offenses to felonies and much more complex crimes.
You also made a reference about the current Nevada Attorney General, what you described as perpetrating discrimination and hate against Asian students with his what was called the amicus brief against Asian students. Can you explain to those that don't understand what an amicus brief is and how serious a problem is the discrimination and hatred against Asians and Asian students in Nevada?
Sure. We over the weekend we had, actually it was last week, we had I believe it was a hate crime. It was a restaurant employee that was killed in the Asian community. And one of the issues that we had here in the U.S. was a huge rise in Asian hate crimes. Nevada's Attorney General filed an amicus brief on behalf of Harvard University. There's a case pending right now, and Biden has actually tried to encourage the Supreme Court not to hear arguments. The case is called Students for Fair Administration versus Harvard. It's a group of Asian students that sued Harvard for unfair admission practices because they had the grades, essentially, they had the grades, they have all the merit-based admissions, but what Harvard did was, what was deny their admission on the basis of social values. So they had all the academics, but because there is this trend towards diversity and inclusion, really Asian students were the ones that got the brunt of this ridiculous policy. And the issue that comes up is Asian students who have worked so hard in high schools, in admissions tests, now they are being denied access because of this woke diversity and inclusion policy, which the Attorney General supports. What this does is, first of all, it stifles a merit based academics policy. And second, what it does is it perpetuates hate against Asian students. Um, so we've got an AG that talks out of both sides of his mouth. He says that he was supporting BLM, and he's purportedly against racial division, but when he files an amicus brief in favor of Harvard and against Asian students, that perpetuates that Asian hate that we're seeing.
This is very strange because and over there in the States, you hear all the time on the TV and everything about critical race theory and things like this. So it's very strange to have a state, again, a democratic state that promotes this critical race theory and anti-racist and everything. And here we are talking about discrimination and hatred against Asians. So, in your words, who are the perpetrators of these? Is it coming from a certain class, a certain race? Or is it the educational system, or what? Who are the perpetrators of hate crimes against Asians?
Well, I think that the perpetrators of the hate crimes are obviously the criminals. Okay, the problem is when you establish a narrative that Asians are, that they have an unfair advantage. Okay, we know that historically Asian communities are hardworking communities. They are very much like the Jewish communities, where they put a priority on education. They put a priority on a merit-based lifestyle. Um, And when you have a demographic in this country that sees that with resentment, okay, it breeds the same type of hate that we've seen it in the anti-Semitic community. Okay, there cannot be resentment in the United States against any community that focuses on success, on hard work, on merit. Um, and we see that along with the Jewish communities. Anti-Semitism at its core comes from a lot of jealousy, a lot of that disparity that breeds resentment. Um, and it's unfortunate because the United States, all these communities that are immigrant communities, believe that you come to the United States, America is the land of opportunity, and you take advantage of those opportunities, and you teach your children to utilize those opportunities to get ahead and be successful. And then you have another segment of the population that, out of jealousy or spite, claims that you shouldn't be there, and that's very disturbing.
So as we round out this subject, I'm beholden to ask you really, if we're talking about this, uh, is there any experience in the state of Nevada about hate crimes and discrimination against Jews, Jewish students, or Jews generally?
It's not as prevalent as we see in larger cities. And I could speak about Las Vegas. It's once in a blue moon you will see a swastika, graffitied in front of like the Jewish fraternity unions, but it's not as prevalent. It's by far nowhere near as prevalent as you see in New York and California and even metropolitan cities like Philadelphia. We are very protected here. There is a strong Jewish community um, with a strong Jewish federation that works cohesively with the Israeli community. So it's not as bad as it is in other cities.
Okay, again, on this subject, is there any problem for either Jewish or pro-Israel students on campuses in Nevada? And is there any BDS boycotts conducted out of Nevada against Israel or Israel products?
Well, we've definitely seen an uptick in the bold behavior from the anti-BDS groups. I was actually very instrumental in 2017 in passing the anti-BDS legislation here in the state of Nevada. We don't have issues like other states, as far as like Unilever, the Ben and Jerry's issue, the academic policies are not as prevalent here. Nevada, for now, is very protected. We had a um, practically unanimous legislature pass the anti-BDS legislation. The Governor Sandoval at the time, signed it. It garnered a lot of support. We don't have those issues. But I will tell you that I have noticed over the past 2 years that a lot more Palestinian flags are being flown anytime there's an incursion into Gaza. There's a lot more vocalization on Las Vegas Boulevard when there's issues in Israel. Save Gaza and all these things that you didn't see 5, 10 years ago. Now this year we saw it a lot. We're seeing processions with Palestinian flags. So there's definitely a voice. The Nevada Democratic Party came out very vocally against the Israeli incursions this year, and that's something that we never saw. We simply never saw this in Nevada. So I do see a trend which has potential to be very disturbing.
Um, has Nevada joined I believe there's over 30 states now that have signed on to anti-boycott legislation. so that they will take action if such a discrimination boycotts occur in the state. Has Nevada signed on to that? And if not, would you advance this legislation if you became Attorney General?
Well, Nevada does have an anti-BDS law, which passed in the 2017 legislative session. So we're safe with that. Nevada's anti-BDS law is actually very. I personally think it's the best anti-BDS legislation that exists across the country, just because there's so many standing issues, and really, like I said, I mean, we have been spoiled in Nevada because we have a very pro-Jewish community, with the exception of now the Democratic Party that took an overt step to really get involved in the Israeli politics, or hold some kind of Israeli policies. And and it's funny because this last year, what you saw is you saw the Nevada GOP, who came out in support of Israel, and then you saw the Democratic Party, which took offense to Israel's actions this last year, and actually supported the Palestinian cause. And that's something that we've never seen in Nevada from the Democratic Party.
Yes, it seems it's filtering down by the radical left in the Democratic Party in Congress and making its way tentacles into some of the states. And this is something we've got to guard against. I understand that Nevada suffered from some egregious incidents of party politics. I know that you have stated and you will be the Attorney General for all the citizens of Nevada. But in the build up to the 2020 national elections, I tracked an incident where the Democratic leadership in your state held an emergency session. I think it was at nighttime and over the weekend, without the Republican members being present in order to change Nevada voting laws. And I think they allowed mail-in ballots, an issue that Republicans opposed. And I understand that's really not constitutional, but they made it an emergency change, a law, in order to cover COVID. Is that correct? And was it legal?
Yeah, I look, at the end of the day, is it accurate? That is basically an accurate portrayal of what happened. Whether it's legal or not, I have my reservations. It hasn't been challenged in our courts to state whether it's legal or not. The Republicans did have a minority. I think that much of the legislation that you've seen come out of these legislative sessions, whether it was 2019 or the emergency sessions, every year that the Democrats have had control of the Nevada legislature, what you're seeing is you're seeing people come out of those legislative sessions as saying, as this was the worst legislative session. It can't get any worse than that. And just when you think that the legislative session can't get any worse, the progressive left, which is dominating the Nevada legislature, makes it worse and takes it one step farther. I think Nevadans are really sick of what they've seen out of the past two legislative sessions, along with the emergency sessions that were called under COVID, and the lack of transparency. And that is why Nevada is up for grabs, and our legislature as well.
I understand also that there's a very public argument going on in your state about Democrat attempts to redistrict the voting map of Nevada to favor the Democrat Party. What can you tell me about this issue?
Well, what they did was, after the 2020 census, they redistricted, and it seemed like they're eating their own. Try to create, spread out some of the Democratic voters throughout the districts, but it turns out that because of this trend towards Republicans in the midterm elections, I think what we're going to see is that this redistricting was in fact going to be problematic for the Democrats. And we saw that what we call in CD1, Congresswoman Dina Titus came out and made a very strong statement about how her own party essentially screwed her over by taking so many Democrat votes out of her districts and spreading it out. So, they're showing that they're eating their own. They're showing this on the national level. They've gotten so caught up in their agendas that they're really not seeing straight, and we're seeing an attrition of the more pragmatic Democrats to independent voters, and people are just sick of their policies.
Yeah, I can tell you that from my outsider perspective, what this redistricting, it seems to be a local example of what I see the Democrats attempting to do nationally by turning the city of Washington into a state, and also I think the island of Puerto Rico into a state, in order to win them an additional 4 extra seats in Congress. That to me looks like a very unconstitutional power grab. Would you agree with that? It,
Oh, absolutely. We know that both these demographics are going to be historically blue areas. And yeah, it is a power grab. It is, and they're getting desperate, but Barry, there's a problem within the Democratic Party. And I think it's a schism that most people don't understand. Those pragmatic Democrats that were pro person, okay, pro worker, pro labor, pro prices, pro affordable housing, pro these these Democrats do not have a party anymore. The Democratic Party is no longer the party of the American dream, and that's the issue that we see right now, and that's why there's such an attrition from that party, because it's no longer the party of the American dream.
well, the thing that we see from here, I have to tell you that it seems to me that from the beginning of 2020, I think you're going to see two things in America. I think you're going to see more openly an expression of any conservative voice is an extremist voice and probably a domestic terrorist or insurrectionist. But at the same time, you're going to see a more blatant attempt to change the Constitution and to introduce places like Washington, D.C., and islands off the coast of America into U.S. states, probably out of desperation, because if you look at the polling numbers right now, they're not exactly in President Biden's or the Democrats' favor. What's your opinion here of, I understand that you have an Obama appointee as your district court chief justice, Miranda Dew, I think her name is, who had a history of
Yes.
blocking attempts to run elections constitutionally, and instead prefers, as we mentioned before, mail-in votes. Do you anticipate the Democrats trying to retain this emergency measure even by November? There's not going to be a national COVID emergency or lockdown, and will you be able to respond to allegations that you're suppressing voter turnout by, in fact, demanding constitutional voting?
Barry, that these are the most ridiculous arguments that the left has come up with. Requiring voter ID to vote in the United States, or in the state of Nevada, as saying that it suppresses votes. It is absolutely ridiculous, because we know that every American, in order to open up a bank account, needs ID. If you want to buy a box of cigarettes, or if you want to buy a bottle of wine, you have to show ID. In order for people to get their checks for the past year, they have had to have voter ID to either cash the check at a check cashing place, or they had to have their ID to open up a bank account. So, this narrative that voter ID suppresses votes is ridiculous. It is, people understand that it's ridiculous. And there's nothing to say other than, the indoctrination from the left that everything that the right proposes to do is discriminatory, it's not inclusive. People are sick of that narrative, and that's how Virginia, after so many years, became a red state, and that's how New Jersey was that close to becoming a red state. And I have to tell you, I tend to believe that we're going to see that trend across the board, because you cannot call everything that you don't agree with non-inclusive and discriminatory. That's not what this country is about. And in the meantime, the left is the one that discriminates the most. I mean, Biden's policy requesting that the Supreme Court not hear SFFA v. Harvard is as discriminatory as it gets. So, that's America today, though. But people are getting sick of it. They are.
Yes, I think she was supported by politician Julian Castro, who called the existing constitutional law inherently racist. One of the things that I can tell you we see over here, that everything seems to be racist in America. You say something that's contrary to Democrat policies or intentions, it becomes racist. And here we have another thing which is constitutional, but it's called racist. Now, tell me, because I'm not fully aware of the parameters of an attorney general, but can, for instance, the state attorney general overrule the decisions of progressive judges, DAs, and prosecutors who refuse to prosecute violent criminals and prefer to see them as victims, releasing them back onto the streets, for instance, we talk about no cash bail, or releasing them from prison early to go out and commit even more lethal crimes? So what I'm asking you really is, if some of these so-called, I hate using the word progressive because it doesn't strike me at all, progressive judges or DAs or prosecutors who refuse to prosecute violent criminals, can a state attorney general overrule these decisions, or are you bound by constitutional rules and cannot intercept these sorts of behaviors?
Well, attorney generals cannot overrule a judge. These are two separate branches. In Nevada, like we spoke earlier, one of the things that the attorney general's office does is enjoy concurrent jurisdiction, and that's why the attorney general is called the top prosecutor. If the county prosecutors do not prosecute, then the attorney general has every authority under the state statute to engage in that concurrent jurisdiction and prosecute. So I'm a law and order candidate. I would be engaging in concurrent jurisdiction. For now, we do have district attorneys that are prosecuting. So that's, I don't anticipate having to overstep the district attorneys, but there are certain crimes that if the district attorneys decide not to prosecute, then I will prosecute as attorney general.
I'm coming on to a sensitive issue of whether attorney general can overrule the governor, but it may not be the case. But the case I want to make is that the Florida attorney general, I believe her name is Ashley Moody, is suing the Biden administration over COVID mandates. This is to do with vaccination and the masking of kids in schools. And she said she's prepared to take this issue to the Supreme Court. And she and her governor, DeSantis, are against federal COVID mandates in their state. Will this happen in Nevada under your watch? And do you have a governor in Nevada that will back you up in this effort?
Well, right now, the governor of Nevada is the governor that I'm currently suing from the private sector. I've sued him on the places of worship. I've sued him on mask mandates, which we just received a decision last week. I'm now appealing that decision to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I hope that he's no longer governor in 2022, but if he does, by some miracle, remain governor, absolutely, I will force his hand on any constitutional violations. The Office of the Attorney General has every right to force the governor to essentially follow the law.
Or follow the Constitution, I guess.
Yes.
All right. Nevada isn't exactly a border state, but you're pretty close to the border. We also have an issue in Florida, where the governor of Florida has had a large number of illegal migrants basically dumped into his state in the middle of the night. And he is seeking a law or getting a law, and I believe he's also back with Governor Greg Abbott in Texas in planning to deport these illegal migrants that arrived unannounced into their states without any prearrangement or agreement. And so far as DeSantis has said, he intends in busing some of them to the state of Delaware, which is Biden's state. Apparently, not many illegal migrants have been deposited there by the Biden administration. If you find this is constitutional to do, is this something that, first of all, is this a problem in Nevada, as it apparently is in Texas and Florida and some other states?
Yes, I mean, immigration and enforcing immigration laws is something that the attorney generals have the obligation to do on behalf of their state. The Biden administration, we know, has violated the Take Care Clause in the Constitution by allowing these immigrants to pour in through the borders. I personally don't know of any incidents where they've had, we'll call it immigrant dumping. In Nevada. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. Essentially, we don't have the media covering it. So it might very well be a reality. But when I'm elected, absolutely immigration laws are going to have to be enforced for public safety.
Okay. So tell me, what's the timetable? I understand you have a primary in which you then, when you win that, you become the Republican candidate for Attorney General. What's the date of that, and what's the date of the elections sometime in November? What can you tell us about the timetable?
Yes. So right now, I do not have a primary candidate. I am the only candidate running for Attorney General in the Nevada GOP. Filing is in March. So far, I don't know of any candidate that's going to run as a GOP candidate. And then the general election, assuming that if there is a primary, if I do draw an opponent in the primary, then my election would be in June. If I do not draw an opponent in the primary, then I would go straight to the general in November.
Is there any message, Sigal, that you want to leave our viewers with? And if anybody wants to help you in your campaign, how do they get hold of you or your campaign headquarters?
Well, my campaign headquarters is down here in Las Vegas. We still haven't opened up a Northern Nevada campaign headquarters. You can get updates from my website on Chattah for Nevada. It's CHATTAH4 Nevada, NAVADA.com. And you could also go on Chattah for Nevada for support, and that's really how you could get a hold of me. And we've got an amazing team that is helping on the ground, and it's great. This is a great campaign. The energy from the Republican Party is amazing, and I anticipate that in 2022, Nevada will turn red.
Well, Sigal, will be following your campaign with heightened interest, and I hope you'll be available to speak with us as your campaign develops and tell us about the progress. In the meantime, Good luck, Mazel Tov, as we say from here, and blessings from Israel, and we'll be following you with great interest.
Thank you very much, Barry. Have a Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov and Batzlacha. Thank you, Sigal. That was Sigal Chattah, the potential next Attorney General for the state of Nevada.
אנו מכריזים בזאת